Marco Santino was a man who owned Miami's waterfront. He had cargo ships that never got inspected and restaurants that never got health violations. When Marco walked into a room, senators stood up. When he made a phone call, evidence disappeared. The Miami Herald called him the gentleman because in 20 years of suspected criminal activity, no one had ever heard him raise his voice. He wore three-piece suits from Seville Row, spoke 4 languages fluently, and lived in a beachfront compound worth $18 million. But the one thing he didn't control was the clock. And being 3 hours early would be the only reason he'd survive the night. It was supposed to be Wednesday. Marco was supposed to be in Paris until Thursday morning, finalizing a €50 million contract with French wine distributors, a legitimate business deal that would help clean 5 years of dirty money through Bordeaux shipping lanes. But when his private Gulfstream G650 touched down at Miami International at 5:23 a.m. due to hydraulic issues, Marco Santino made a decision that would save his life and destroy his empire. He decided to surprise his daughter with breakfast. He pulled his black Mercedes S-Class through the iron gates of his compound at 5:47 a.m., the engine purring like a satisfied cat. The house should have been asleep. The sunrise was still 20 minutes away, painting the sky that particular shade of purple that happens just before the world wakes up. Marco killed the engine in the circular driveway, listening to the tick of cooling metal. That's when he noticed it. The garage door was open. Not just unlocked, open. Wide open, like a mouth frozen mid-scream. Tony's silver Mercedes was parked inside, crooked, one wheel on the grass. Marco's instincts, honed by 25 years in a world where hesitation meant death, started screaming. His younger brother Tony was supposed to be at his own penthouse downtown, sleeping off whatever bottle he'd killed the night before. Tony didn't do early mornings. Tony didn't do discipline. And Tony sure as hell didn't park on the lawn of Marco's meticulous estate. Marco reached under his seat and felt the cold comfort of his Beretta 92 FS. He'd carried the same gun for 15 years. It had never jammed, never misfired, and had solved more problems than Marco cared to remember. He checked the magazine by feel, 15 rounds, 1 in the chamber. Enough for whatever was waiting inside. He stepped out of the car, leaving his overnight bag in the trunk. The Miami humidity hit him like a wet towel, even at this hour. The air smelled like salt water and night-blooming jasmine from Veronica's garden. Veronica. His wife of 20 years who died from cancer 3 years ago, leaving him alone with their daughter Sophia. He'd kept the jasmine because Sophia said it reminded her of her mother. Marco moved toward the house, his Italian leather shoes silent on the stone pathway. He'd paid a landscaper $2,000 a month to keep the crushed granite perfectly raked. No footprints. No disturbances. But tonight, there were tire tracks in the grass where Tony had driven. Fresh tracks. Recent. The rain in Miami didn't wash things clean. It just made the evidence slicker. Marco approached the side entrance, the one that led through the mudroom into the kitchen. He had 4 entrances to this house, and he'd memorized the sight lines from every window, every camera angle. This door was the blind spot, if you knew where to stand. And Marco knew his own house better than he knew his own soul. He slid his key into the lock. The deadbolt turned without a sound. Marco paid a man $300 a month to oil every hinge, every lock, every moving part of this fortress. Silence was a luxury most people didn't understand. In Marco's world, silence was survival. The door swung inward. Marco stepped into the darkness of the mudroom, his hand already on his weapon, finger resting alongside the trigger guard. Not on the trigger, never on the trigger until you were ready to destroy something. His father had taught him that, back when his father still drew breath and the Santino family ran protection rackets out of Little Havana instead of controlling the 5th largest port in the United States. The smell of the house hit him first. Lemon polish. Old wood. The faint expensive scent of lilies that Sophia insisted on having in the foyer, just like her mother had. But underneath those familiar smells was something else. Cologne. Not his cologne. Tony's cologne, that aggressive designer scent that cost $400 a bottle and smelled like a nightclub at 2 a.m. Marco moved through the mudroom into the kitchen. The motion sensor lights should have activated. They didn't. Someone had disabled them. Someone who knew the house. Someone who had the security codes. The kitchen was vast, all marble and stainless steel, designed by an architect from Milan who charged $60,000 just to fly out for the consultation. In the ambient light filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Marco could see the shapes of his life: the espresso machine that cost more than most people's cars, the knife block from Germany, the breakfast bar where Sophia did her homework while he pretended to read the newspaper and actually watched her, memorizing every expression on her face because he knew, he'd always known, that his world would eventually take him away from her. And that's when he saw her. A figure stood in the shadows near the breakfast bar, utterly still, backlit by the faint glow of the digital clock on the oven. Marco's gun was up in half a second, aimed center mass, his thumb already moving to disengage the safety. "Don't move," he hissed, his voice barely above a whisper. The figure gasped, a soft, startled sound, and stepped into the thin band of light coming from the windows. It was Elena, the waitress from Oceania. She was young, maybe 28, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail and wide eyes that looked black in the dimness. She was still wearing her uniform from the restaurant, black slacks, white button-down shirt, the small Oceania logo embroidered over her heart. She was clutching something in her hand, her knuckles white with tension. Marco lowered the gun slightly, but didn't holster it. He knew everyone who worked for him, but Elena was new. Hired maybe 8 months ago. She was the quiet one. The one who never spoke unless spoken to. The one who served drinks with hands that always seemed to tremble slightly, like she was perpetually on the edge of dropping the tray. The staff called her the nervous girl behind her back. But she didn't look nervous now. "Elena," Marco said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his chest. "What are you doing in my house?" Elena didn't answer immediately. Her eyes darted from his face to something on the counter, then back to him. She was trembling, but it wasn't the trembling of fear. It was the trembling of adrenaline. Of someone whose body was flooded with so much fight-or-flight chemistry that standing still was physically painful. "Mr. Santino," she breathed, her voice barely audible. You're in Paris." "Plans changed," Marco said, taking a step forward. His gun was still pointed at her, not quite aimed at her heart but close enough to matter. "Where is everyone? Where's my daughter? Where's my security team?" The house was supposed to have 3 men on rotation at all times. Professionals. Ex-military. Men who Marco paid $200,000 a year each, plus benefits, plus the kind of loyalty you could only buy with consistent paychecks and the promise that if they ever got arrested doing something for him, their families would be taken care of for life. Where were they? Elena's eyes went wide, and in that moment, Marco saw something he didn't expect to see. Not fear. Not confusion. Recognition. Like she'd been waiting for this exact question. She took a frantic step toward him, abandoning all protocol, all sense of appropriate distance between a waitress and her boss. Her hand shot out and grabbed his lapel, his $1,500 suit jacket, and pulled him toward her with surprising strength. "Hey," Marco began, annoyed, his free hand coming up to push her away. "Shoo!" Elena hissed, the sound sharp as a whip crack. She looked terrified. Tears were welling in her eyes. But her grip on his jacket didn't loosen. She pressed a finger to her lips, her eyes pleading with him in the darkness. "Please, sir," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Not a word. Stay silent." Marco Santino had built an empire on the ability to read people. To see the micro-expressions that revealed lies, the tiny hesitations that exposed weakness, the subtle shifts in posture that telegraphed violence before it happened. And in that moment, looking into Elena's eyes, he saw something that made his blood run cold. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't confusion. This was fear of death. Real fear. The kind that came from knowing, with absolute certainty, that speaking too loud would get you killed. Marco's annoyance evaporated, replaced by the cold, calculating focus that had kept him alive in a business where most people didn't see their 40th birthday. He nodded slowly, and Elena released his jacket. She pointed with a shaking finger toward the breakfast bar. On the marble counter sat Sophia's baby monitor. The expensive one with the video screen. The one Sophia had begged him to get rid of last year because she was 16, not a baby, and didn't need her father checking on her every 5 minutes. Marco had kept it anyway. Plugged in. Always on. Just in case. The screen was active. And on that screen, Marco could see the hallway outside Sophia's bedroom. Could see 3 men standing in the shadows. 3 men dressed in tactical gear. 3 men holding weapons with suppressors attached. 3 men standing outside his daughter's bedroom door at 5:52 in the morning. Marco's heart, which had been pounding hard, suddenly felt like it stopped completely. Like someone had reached into his chest and squeezed it into silence. His daughter was in that room. Sleeping. Vulnerable. Unaware that death was standing 6 feet away from her, waiting. "They're in your daughter's bedroom," Elena whispered, her voice so quiet it was almost lost in the hum of the refrigerator. Her eyes never left his face. "And they're not there to tuck her in." The world seemed to tilt sideways. Marco Santino, who'd survived 3 assassination attempts, 2 FBI investigations, and a war with the Alvarez cartel that had left 17 people dead, felt something he hadn't felt in 20 years. Pure, undiluted terror. Not for himself. For Sophia. His daughter. The only light in the darkness of his life. The only reason he'd even considered going legitimate, leaving this world behind, trying to build something clean for her future. And someone was in her bedroom. Marco's grip tightened on his Beretta. Every instinct, every violent impulse honed by decades in this life, screamed at him to run upstairs, to empty his magazine into those 3 men, to protect his child the way a father is supposed to protect his child. But Elena grabbed his wrist, her fingers digging into his skin with desperate strength. "They're waiting for you," she whispered. "They have the staircase covered. If you go up there, you're dead. And then Sophia's alone with them." Marco forced himself to breathe. To think. "Who sent them?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Elena's hand was still on his wrist. She could feel his pulse, probably feel how fast his heart was hammering. She reached into her pocket with her other hand and pulled out a wireless earbud. The kind you'd use for a phone call. Or for listening to something you didn't want anyone else to hear. She held it out to him. Her hand was steady now. Like she'd made a decision and committed to it with every fiber of her being. "Put it in," she whispered. "Listen. And then you'll understand why we need to stay very, very quiet." Marco hesitated for half a second. This could be a trap. Elena could be part of this. She could be feeding him poison through that earbud, distracting him while the men upstairs moved into position. But something in her eyes, something desperate and honest and raw, made him trust her. He took the earbud and placed it in his right ear. At first, all he heard was static. The soft white noise of an open channel. Then, filtering through that static like voices from another world, he heard them. "Worried about the timeline, Luca." A woman's voice. Clipped. Professional. Marco's blood went colder. He knew that voice. Detective Sarah Chen. Miami PD. The cop he'd been paying $10,000 a month for the past 5 years to keep him informed about raids, investigations, wiretaps. His inside woman. His insurance policy. "Relax, Sarah." Another voice. Male. Smooth. Casual. Almost bored. Marco's world didn't just crack. It shattered. That was Tony's voice. His brother. His little brother who he'd raised after their parents died in a car accident. The brother he'd put through college. The brother he'd made his underboss, his second in command, his heir apparent. Tony was in this house, talking to Detective Chen. And they were discussing a timeline. Marco's hand, still holding the Beretta, began to shake. Not from fear. From rage so pure and white-hot that it threatened to override every bit of tactical training he'd ever received. But he kept listening. If the plane lands in London and he doesn't check in at the hotel, Chen was saying, his contacts over there will start making calls. We need to make sure the story holds up. The story holds up perfectly, Tony replied, and Marco could hear the smile in his voice. The same smile Tony used to give him when they were kids and Tony was lying about breaking something or stealing something or getting into trouble. Home invasion gone wrong. Marco dies protecting Sophia. Tragic. Heroic. The whole city mourns. I inherit everything. Marco felt Elena's hand on his arm, steadying him, keeping him grounded, keeping him from doing something stupid like running upstairs and getting them all killed. And the girl? Chen asked. There was a pause. A horrible, weighted pause that seemed to stretch for an eternity. She goes to boarding school, Tony said finally. My niece doesn't need to know her uncle killed her father. She'll grieve. She'll move on. And by the time she's 18, she'll have forgotten all about this life. The casual cruelty in Tony's voice, the way he discussed destroying a 16-year-old girl's entire world like he was discussing the weather, made something in Marco's chest twist and break. A third voice spoke up. Male. Heavily accented. Russian. And the crew, the voice asked. My men, they get paid half now, half when the job is complete, yes? That's right, Dmitri, Tony said. $2 million. $1 million now, $1 million when Marco Santino is in the ground and I'm signing the port contracts with you instead of with those French wine merchants. Marco's mind was racing. The contracts. The shipping lanes. The legitimate business deal he'd been working on for 6 months. It all made sense now. Tony didn't want Marco to go legitimate. Tony wanted Marco dead so he could sell the family's port access to the Russians. The Kozlov organization. Dmitry Kozlov. Marco knew the name. Everyone in this business knew the name. The Russians had been trying to muscle into Miami for 5 years, but Marco had kept them out. Too violent. Too reckless. Too likely to bring federal heat that would burn everyone. But Tony was going to let them in. For $2 million and control of the Santino empire. What about security? Dmitri asked. Your brother, he has men. Professional men. Tony laughed. It was a sound that Marco had heard 1,000 times. Usually over dinner, or drinks, or late-night conversations when they were planning operations together. Brothers. Family. The only family either of them had left. The security team called in sick tonight, Tony said. All 3 of them. Amazing coincidence. You paid them off, Chen said. It wasn't a question. I doubled their salary and sent them to the Bahamas for the weekend, Tony confirmed. By the time they realize what happened, Marco will be buried and I'll be the one signing their paychecks. They'll fall in line. Marco's security team. The men he trusted with his life. The men he trusted with his daughter's life. Gone. Paid off. Sent away so that Tony could murder him in his own home. And the waitress? Dimitri's voice again, curious. What about her? Marco felt Elena stiffen beside him. Her hand on his arm tightened. Tony laughed again. Elena? The nervous little mouse from Oceania? She's at the restaurant closing up. She doesn't know anything. She's nobody. The way Tony said it, nobody, with such casual dismissal, such complete contempt. Elena slowly pulled her hand away from Marco's arm. In the darkness, he couldn't see her expression clearly, but he could feel the shift in her energy. The trembling had stopped completely. She stood rigid, statue still, like she'd turned to stone. Still, Chen's voice, cautious. She works your restaurants. She sees things. She sees nothing, Tony said, irritated now. She's been there 8 months and hasn't said 10 words to anyone. She's practically invisible. Perfect for what I needed. What you needed? Marco whispered, so quietly that even Elena barely heard him. But she did hear him. She turned to look at him, and in the faint light, Marco saw her eyes. They weren't the eyes of a frightened waitress anymore. They were calculating. Sharp. The eyes of someone who'd been playing a role for 8 months and had just heard her performance evaluated. Later, she whispered back. Keep listening. Send your men upstairs in 2 minutes, Dmitri, Tony said, his voice taking on a commander's tone. Make it quick. 1 shot to the head. Marco won't even wake up. Then stage it, break some windows, make it look like they were surprised, fought back. Chen files it as a home invasion. Russian crew disappears. By tomorrow night, I'm on the news crying about my brother. By next week, I'm taking meetings with your organization about our new partnership. Efficient, Dmitri said, approval in his voice. I like efficient. One more thing, Chen said. What about Agent Rivera? Marco's ears perked up. Agent Rivera. FBI. Organized Crime Division. She'd been building a case against him for 3 years. He knew it. She knew he knew it. It was a game of chess they'd been playing, both of them moving pieces, waiting for the other to make a mistake. What about her? Tony asked. She's not going to believe a convenient home invasion that happens to kill the target of her RICO investigation. Let her investigate, Tony said, unconcerned. She'll find exactly what we want her to find. A tragic coincidence. Random violence. Welcome to Miami. Besides, with Marco gone, she loses her case. All her evidence is built around him. I'm clean. Always have been. The arrogance in Tony's voice was suffocating. He really believed he'd thought of everything. Covered every angle. Prepared for every contingency. He'd just never considered that Marco might come home early. 2 minutes, Tony said. Go. The earbud went silent. Not dead, Marco could still hear the ambient noise, the rustling of movement. But the conversation was over. Marco pulled the earbud out with shaking hands. He looked at Elena, this waitress who was apparently nobody, apparently invisible, apparently so inconsequential that his brother didn't even consider her a security risk. How long have you been listening? Marco asked. 6 weeks, Elena said. I've been recording everything. Every phone call Tony made from his office at Oceana. Every meeting he took in the back room. Every conversation with Detective Chen. Marco's tactical mind kicked in, overriding his emotional devastation. Why are you helping me? You don't know me. I don't even know your last name. Elena's jaw tightened. In the darkness, she looked like a completely different person. The nervous waitress was gone, replaced by someone harder. Someone who'd been hiding in plain sight. My name is Elena Reyes, she said. Roberto Reyes was my father. The name hit Marco like a physical blow. Roberto Reyes. His enforcer from 15 years ago. The man who'd taken a murder charge for Marco. Who'd gone to prison for 20 years to protect the family. Who'd never talked, never cooperated, never given up a single name. Marco had sent him money for the first 5 years. Then the money stopped. Then the letters Roberto sent from prison went unanswered. Then, nothing. Marco had moved on. Built his empire higher. Forgotten the man rotting in a cell for him. Roberto died 3 months ago, Elena said, and her voice was very quiet. Very controlled. Prison cancer. Ate through his lungs. The state gave him a box to be buried in and sent my mother a bill for his final medical care. Marco felt something twist in his chest. Guilt. a sensation he trained himself not to feel. In this business, guilt was a luxury. Guilt was weakness. Guilt got you killed. But here it was anyway. Sharp and hot and undeniable. I didn't know, Marco said. You didn't ask, Elena replied. You moved him from asset to liability to forgotten, and you never looked back. That's what my father got for 15 years of loyalty. Silence. So why save me? Marco asked. If you hate me so much, why not let them kill me? Get your revenge. Watch the man who destroyed your father die in his own home. Elena was quiet for a long moment. Then she lifted the baby monitor from the counter and showed Marco the screen. Sophia's bedroom door. The three men in tactical gear, checking their weapons, preparing to move. Because they're going to kill her too, Elena said. Maybe not tonight. Maybe they'll wait a week or a month. But Sophia knows too much about your business, even if she doesn't realize it. Tony will see her as a liability eventually. And I'm not like you, Mr. Santino. I don't let innocent people die just because it's convenient. The word stung because they were true. Marco had let innocent people die. Collateral damage. The cost of doing business. He justified it 1,000 different ways, but at the end of the day, he'd made choices that ended lives. Like Gerald Moss. The port inspector. The one Roberto had taken the fall for killing. Marco pushed that memory down, deep down where he kept all the things he couldn't afford to think about. We have 2 minutes to get Sophia out, Elena said, all business now. But there are men in the hallway, men on the stairs, and Tony's got someone watching every exit. We're trapped in your own fortress, Mr. Santino. So what do we do? What Marco heard next from the top of the stairs didn't just break his heart. It shattered his entire reality. Through the baby monitor speaker, faint but unmistakable, came his brother's voice one more time. Oh, and Dimitri? Make sure you get a picture of Marco's face after it's done. I want to see it. I want to remember the exact moment I became free. Marco stared at the baby monitor screen. The three men were moving now, hands on door handles, ready to breach Sophia's room. He had maybe 90 seconds before they kicked in that door. 90 seconds before they put bullets in his 16-year-old daughter while she slept surrounded by her stuffed animals and Princeton University posters and the scrapbook she'd made of her mother. 90 seconds to save the only thing in his life that mattered. Follow me, Marco whispered. And don't make a sound. He moved through the kitchen with the kind of silent precision that came from years of breaking into places he shouldn't be. Elena followed, her waitress shoes somehow making no noise on the marble floor. They crossed through the dining room, past the table that seated 14, past the china cabinet filled with Veronica's collection of Italian ceramics, past the painting Marco had paid $200,000 for because the artist's name impressed people he needed to impress. All of it felt hollow now. Meaningless. Props on a life he'd built on violence and lies. They reached the butler's pantry, a narrow room lined with shelves and a door that led down to the wine cellar. Marco's hand found the hidden latch behind the third shelf. He'd had this installed 5 years ago, after a threat from the Alvarez cartel. A panic room. Sophia didn't know about it. No one knew about it except Marco and the contractor he'd paid an extra $100,000 to keep his mouth shut. The shelf swung inward, revealing a steel door with a biometric lock. Marco pressed his thumb to the scanner. The lock clicked open with a sound like a bank vault. Inside was a room about 10 feet by 12 feet. Concrete walls. Steel reinforced. A setup that could withstand a direct assault for hours. Monitors lined one wall, showing every camera angle of the property. Weapons lined another wall, rifles, shotguns, enough ammunition to fight a small war. A satellite phone sat on a small desk, along with a laptop hardwired into an encrypted server. And there, on the largest monitor, Marco could see his entire estate lit up in grayscale surveillance footage. 8 men total. 3 upstairs outside Sophia's room. 2 on the main staircase. Two at the front entrance. One in the garage, probably watching Tony's car and Marco's Mercedes. They were surrounded. Outnumbered. Outgunned. Elena moved to the monitors, her eyes scanning the footage with the kind of analytical precision that shouldn't exist in a nervous waitress. Your daughter's room has a balcony, she said. Fire escape ladder down to the pool deck. Marco shook his head. It's locked from the outside. Security measure. Can't be opened from inside without the main panel override. Elena pulled out her phone, not the cheap smartphone most waitresses carried, but a newer model with a cracked screen that looked like it had been through hell. She swiped through screens with practiced fingers. Not anymore, she said, showing him an app. The smart home control panel for his entire estate. Every lock. Every camera. Every system. How do you have access to my security system? Marco asked, though part of him already knew the answer. I've had access for 6 months, Elena said matter-of-factly. How do you think I knew Tony was coming tonight? I've been monitoring your cameras, your communication systems, everything. I was waiting for the right moment. The right moment for what? Marco asked, though he was starting to piece it together. To kill me? Elena met his eyes. Yes. Originally. I spent 8 months watching you, learning your patterns, finding your vulnerabilities. I was going to poison your espresso one morning. Make it look like a heart attack. You'd die in your office, surrounded by your expensive things, and I'd disappear before anyone even realized I existed. The casual way she said it, like discussing a recipe, should have terrified Marco. Instead, he felt a strange respect. This girl had infiltrated his life, earned his trust without him even noticing, and positioned herself to kill him. That took skill. That took patience. That took the kind of ruthless calculation he recognized because he'd built a career on it. So what changed your mind? Marco asked. I heard Tony's plan, Elena said. Heard him talking about Sophia like she was a problem to be solved. Heard him laugh about leaving her alone in the world after killing her father. And I realized something. What? That you love your daughter. Really love her. I watched you for months, and the only time you're not performing, not calculating, not playing the role of Marco Santino the crime boss is when you're with Sophia. You become someone different. Someone almost human. Elena turned back to the monitors. My father died thinking you forgot him. But he also died knowing he'd saved an innocent man from going to prison. That's what he told himself to survive 20 years in that place. That his sacrifice meant something. That he saved someone worth saving. I'm not going to let Tony kill a kid just to get revenge on her father. My father wouldn't want that. Marco felt his throat tighten. Your father was a good man, Elena. Better than me. I should have. Later, Elena cut him off, her voice sharp. Right now, we have about 60 seconds before they breach Sophia's room and realize the bed is empty. Empty? Marco looked at the monitor showing Sophia's bedroom. The door was opening. The 3 men were moving inside, weapons raised. But the bed was indeed empty. The covers were pulled back like someone had just gotten up. Where is she? Marco demanded. Elena tapped her phone. I triggered her bathroom motion sensor 5 minutes ago. Set off the automatic nightlight. Sophia's a light sleeper, all that caffeine she drinks studying. She got up to check. Right now she's in her bathroom, confused about why the sensor went off. On the monitor, Marco could see the tactical team searching the room. One of them moved toward the bathroom door. We're out of time, Marco said. Elena was already moving, her fingers flying over the phone screen. I'm unlocking the balcony door now. Triggering the fire alarm in 3, 2, 1. The monitors flashed red. The ear-splitting scream of the fire alarm erupted through the entire estate. Marco could see it on the monitors, the tactical team flinching, momentarily disoriented by the sudden noise. People reaching for their ears, their communication systems drowned out by the alarm. Sophia knows what to do, Elena said. I taught her last month during a dinner shift when you weren't there. Told her it was a safety drill. If the fire alarm ever goes off, she goes to the balcony, down the fire escape, runs to the beach. Marco stared at this woman, this waitress he'd barely noticed, this ghost in his own house, who had planned his daughter's escape route a month ago while serving him dinner. Who the hell are you? He asked. Someone who learned from the best, Elena said. You taught me, Mr. Santino. You just didn't know you were teaching me. Now move. We need to get to the pool deck before those men regroup. Marco grabbed a Glock 19 from the weapons rack, checked the magazine, chambered around. He offered Elena a weapon. She shook her head. I don't use guns, she said. You're about to run through a property filled with armed men. I've been running through dangerous places my whole life, Mr. Santino. I don't need a gun. I need to be invisible. That's my superpower. She moved to the panic room door, cracked it open, listened. The fire alarm was still screaming. On the monitors, Marco could see chaos, the tactical team coming down from upstairs, Tony and Detective Chen emerging from Marco's study, Dimitri's voice barking orders in Russian that the alarm drowned out. The servants' staircase, Elena said. East side of the house. They don't know about it because it's not on the main blueprints. But I found it when I was researching the property. Original construction from the 1920s, before your grandfather renovated. Marco knew the staircase she meant. Narrow. Dark. Used maybe twice a year when the cleaning service needed to move equipment between floors. He'd honestly forgotten it existed. They moved. Through the wine cellar. Up a narrow corridor that smelled like dust and old concrete. Elena moved like smoke, like she could sense where every obstacle was in the darkness. Marco followed, his breath coming hard, his shoulder aching from where he'd scraped it against the rough wall. Behind them, he could hear shouts. Orders being barked. The tactical team was searching the house, trying to find Sophia, trying to understand why the fire alarm had triggered. They reached the servants' staircase. Elena went first, her feet finding each step like she'd walked this path 1,000 times. Maybe she had. Maybe while Marco was in his office making deals and counting money, Elena had been learning every secret passage, every hidden corner of his own house. They emerged on the second floor, in a linen closet that opened onto the back hallway. Through the doorway, Marco could see the main corridor. The tactical team was there, weapons up, clearing rooms. Looking for Sophia. Looking for him. Elena held up her phone. On the screen was a camera feed from the pool deck. Sophia was there, in her pajamas, looking terrified and confused, standing at the top of the fire escape ladder. She's safe, Elena whispered. She's out. Now we need to get to her. How? They're between us and the pool deck. Elena smiled. It was a strange smile. Not happy. Not cruel. Just knowing. Like she'd been waiting for this exact moment and had already planned 17 steps ahead. You're going to create a distraction, she said. And I'm going to get Sophia off the property. What kind of distraction? Elena pointed to the window at the end of the hallway. The wine cellar. The one we just left. You have 17 cases of Chateau Margaux down there, right? Worth about $60,000 total? Yes, Marco said, confused. You also have an electrical panel in that cellar. Old wiring. Copper. Very flammable if you, say, short it out with a wine bottle full of very expensive, very flammable alcohol. Marco understood. You want me to burn down my own house. I want you to burn down the wine cellar, Elena corrected. The fire will spread, but slowly. Old concrete construction will contain it for a while. But it'll trigger every sprinkler, every smoke detector, every emergency system you have. Complete chaos. Dimitri's men will panic, Russians hate fire, it reminds them of what happened in Moscow in '92. Tony will try to salvage the operation. Detective Chen will want to call it off. And in that chaos, I walked Sophia out the front gate. It was insane. It was reckless. It would destroy a significant portion of his home and his wine collection. It was also brilliant. Go, Marco said. I'll give you 3 minutes, then I'll start the fire. Elena nodded. Then, surprisingly, she reached out and touched his arm. Just for a second. Your daughter is strong, she said. Stronger than you know. She'll survive this. The question is, will you? Before Marco could answer, Elena was gone. Just gone. She moved so silently that he couldn't even hear her footsteps. One moment she was there, the next she was a memory. Marco checked his watch. Started counting. 180 seconds. He moved back through the servant's staircase, down to the wine cellar. The panic room door was still open. He could hear voices upstairs, muffled by the fire alarm. Marco entered the wine cellar proper. 17 cases of Chateau Margaux, vintage 2015. He bought it at auction for $63,000 as an investment. The value had appreciated. He could sell it now for maybe $90,000. He grabbed a bottle, smashed it against the concrete floor. The red wine splashed like blood across the gray stone. The alcohol smell was immediate and sharp. 90 seconds left. Marco opened the electrical panel. Old wiring, just like Elena said. Copper cables wrapped in cloth insulation that was probably original to the house. His contractor had recommended updating it. Marco had said he'd get to it eventually. Eventually had just arrived. He grabbed another bottle of wine, smashed it. Grabbed another. Smashed it. The floor was slick with wine now, the alcohol fumes making his eyes water. 60 seconds. Marco found a metal wine rack, ripped it from the wall. The screws tore free with a screech that even the fire alarm couldn't mask. He jammed the metal rack into the electrical panel, shorting out the main power line. Sparks erupted. Blue-white electricity arcing across wet wine and old wiring. 30 seconds. The sparks found the alcohol. The fire didn't explode like in movies. It started small. A blue flame, almost invisible at first, crawling across the wine-soaked floor. Then it found the cloth insulation on the wiring. Then it found the wooden crates the wine bottles were stored in. Then it found oxygen. Marco ran. The fire was behind him, growing, feeding on everything his contractor had warned him would burn if he didn't update the electrical system. He sealed the panic room door. Steel would contain the fire for a while, but eventually the heat would be too much. He took the stairs 3 at a time, emerging in the main hall just as all the lights in the house cut out. The fire had killed the main power. Emergency lights kicked on, bathing everything in that sickly red glow that meant disaster. And then the sprinklers activated. Water cascaded from the ceiling, drenching everything. Drenching the tactical team that was searching the second floor. Drenching Marco as he moved toward the main staircase. He could hear Dmitri screaming in Russian. Could hear Tony shouting. Could hear Detective Ching yelling into her phone, trying to get control of the situation. But all Marco cared about was the monitor feed he'd seen in the panic room. The one showing the front gate. The one where Elena was walking calmly through the chaos, her arm around Sophia's shoulders, guiding her out into the darkness beyond the compound. Marco reached the top of the main staircase. Below him, in the foyer, he could see Tony. His brother. Standing in the water, drenched, furious, holding a phone to his ear and screaming at someone. Their eyes met across the distance. And in that moment, Tony understood. Marco was alive. Marco was here. Marco had ruined everything. Tony's hand moved toward his waistband. Toward a gun. But Marco was faster. He aimed his Beretta down the staircase and fired 3 shots. Not at Tony. At the massive crystal chandelier hanging above the foyer. 3 shots. 3 cables supporting 2,000 pounds of Bohemian crystal. The chandelier fell. Tony dove sideways, crashing into Detective Chen, both of them hitting the marble floor as 2,000 pounds of crystal and steel smashed down exactly where Tony had been standing. The sound was catastrophic. Glass exploding. Metal shrieking. The entire house seeming to shake from the impact. Marco didn't wait to see if Tony survived. He ran down the back staircase, the one that led to the pool deck, the one that led to freedom. Behind him, his house was burning. His empire was collapsing. His brother was trying to kill him. But Elena had gotten Sophia out. That was all that mattered. Marco burst through the pool deck door into the humid Miami night. Dawn was breaking now, the sky turning that impossible shade of orange that only happened over the ocean. The air smelled like smoke and salt water and jasmine. He could see them at the front gate. Elena and Sophia. Sophia was crying, confused, terrified. Elena was calm, leading her toward the street, toward safety. Marco started to run toward them. That's when the headlights hit him. Bright. Blinding. SUVs screeching to a stop at the front gate. Marco raised his gun, ready for more of Dimitri's men. But the doors opened, and men in FBI windbreakers poured out. Marco Santino, a voice boomed through a megaphone. You're under arrest. Drop your weapon. And Marco realized that the fire, the chaos, the gunshots, someone had called the authorities. Maybe a neighbor. Maybe one of Tony's men trying to save themselves. It didn't matter. The FBI had arrived. And they'd found him standing outside his burning house, holding a gun, with his daughter and a waitress at the front gate. This wasn't rescue. This was the end of everything. Detective Chen had promised Tony no FBI interference. But someone had called them anyway. Or maybe, and Marco's tactical mind was still working even in crisis, maybe someone had planned for this. Maybe someone had known exactly when to make that call. He looked at Elena, standing 50 feet away, her arm still around Sophia. Elena met his eyes. And for just a second, she nodded. She'd called them. She'd planned this. All of it. The FBI rushed forward. Marco dropped his gun, raised his hands. But not before he saw Elena leading Sophia past the FBI line, past the chaos, into a waiting car that Marco didn't recognize. His daughter was safe. That's all he'd asked for. Everything else, his freedom, his empire, his life, that was the price. And as the FBI tackled him to the wet grass, as they zip-tied his hands behind his back, as they read him his rights, Marco Santino smiled. Because his brother Tony had made a fatal mistake. Tony had assumed that Marco valued his own life above his daughter's. But Tony had never been a father. Tony had never known what it felt like to love something more than you loved yourself. And that difference, that one fundamental difference, was why Marco had won. Even as he was losing everything. From a nervous waitress trembling while she served drinks, to the woman who saved a mob boss's daughter while destroying his empire, Elena Reyes proved that revenge and justice aren't the same thing. She could have let Marco die that morning. Could have let Tony's plan succeed. Could have avenged her father by doing nothing at all. But Elena made a choice. She chose to save a 16-year-old girl who'd never done anything except have the wrong father. Marco Santino lost everything that night. His home burned. His brother betrayed him. The FBI arrested him. His empire crumbled to ashes in less than 6 hours. But he gained something he'd never had as a crime boss, the knowledge that his daughter would remember him not as the man who committed crimes, but as the man who sacrificed everything to save her. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button. It helps me bring you more incredible stories like this. Subscribe and turn on notifications because next week's story is absolutely wild. A wedding photographer who discovers the groom is supposed to be dead, and the bride knew the whole time. Here's my question for you. If you were Elena standing in that kitchen at 5:47 a.m., would you have warned Marco? Or would you have let revenge play out and avenged your father? Drop a comment below. I genuinely want to know what you'd choose. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.